Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. And today a review I'm really excited to share with you, that being the Ollo S4X here. This is a mastering headphone designed specifically for use in recording studios and similar situations where people need accuracy and precision from the headphone in predicting the end result of their mix. I recently reviewed the Phonon SMB-02, which is a closed headphone with similar aspirations, but I have to say the S4X just takes it to a whole different level. So if you want to find out what I mean by that, stick around and I'll try to explain why I think the S4X is a must-have for anybody that needs accuracy from their headphone solution. My name's Lachlan, let's get into the review. The S4X are made by a company called Ollo out of Slovenia in Europe. They retail for €399, which is about $450 or over here in Australia, they're going to retail for $699 Australian dollars. So they're not an expensive headphone, but they're in that sort of mid-tier once again, similar to the Phonons that I reviewed recently. They're a 32 ohm, 108 decibel sensitivity headphone, so they're also very easy to drive from pretty much any device you can think of. The S4X are sort of open, which I'll talk about in a minute, and they're also an over-ear design. So from a comfort point of view, they're already a step ahead of the SMB-02, but they've got so much more going for them than that. To start explaining what I mean, let's talk about what you get when you buy the S4X. First and foremost, of course, you get the headphones themselves. So these are made with a beautiful wooden cup on each side. You've got an open metal grill on the outside of each cup. You've got the foam pads on the inside, which are a combination of leather and velour on the inside that touches the skin. You've then got a headband made of sort of a spring steel type situation with an elasticized leather pad. That's the bit that makes contact with your head. So there's nothing groundbreaking about their design, but one thing I do like is it's fully serviceable. And that's really important, A, because if these are going to be workhorse headphones, you might damage them one day, something might wear out one day, and it's good to know you can replace one piece at a time. The other reason I think it's really important is I've had dreadful experiences with elasticized headbands like this. AudioQuest come to mind with their Nighthawk and Night Owl, headphones that I love, but headbands that I hate. They're really comfortable when they're new, but after a number of years, the elastic gets really soggy and there's no support on top of your head. So the fact that these are designed where you can replace it as soon as you need it is a really big plus in my eyes. The comfort is great, and now the longevity issue is taken care of, knowing that there's spare parts available. Putting these aside for a moment, let's talk about what else you get. There's the cable, which is okay. It's not fantastic, but it's fine. It's a 6.3mm termination with a screw-off adapter for 3.5mm. And there's also at the other end, a pair of 2.5mm connectors to the headphones themselves. So having just referred to AudioQuest, another reference now, you can use the AudioQuest cables to connect to the Ollos. So I'm not suggesting there's an abundance of AudioQuest headphone cables around because the Nighthawk and Night Owl have been discontinued, but if you did happen to have them or can get them, they're a much better quality cable than the one that's provided by Ollo. As I said, this one's fine, it's serviceable, it's got a nice soft cloth braid around the bulk of the cable, and then after the splitter it's got a rubberized red sheathing for the separate sections that go up to the earphones themselves. Now that's good because you don't tend to get microphonics from the rubber, but I'm not necessarily a fan of the red. They also just don't feel like the greatest cables in the world, but they're serviceable and they're fine. One final thing to mention is that the left and right channels are defined by the cable rather than by the headphones. So it doesn't matter which way you plug them in, there's no left and right ear cup, there's just a left and right cable. So with the little left and right markings on the silver parts of the cable here, that's what's going to define which way you put the headphones on. Putting the cable aside for a moment, I want to mention a couple other things that come in the box. One of them is a leather carry case or bag. It's just a soft bag for the S4X, and that's great. If they are going to be a mastering tool and a work tool, there's a chance you might be moving from studio to studio with them. The other thing I want to mention is what's inside this sleeve here. This is for me where the difference comes up between Ollo and Phonon with the SMB-02. The SMB-02, you just get a headphone in a box. With the S4X, what you're getting here is a specific custom frequency measurement for your particular headphones. You're also getting instructions there on how to set up for mastering. Specifically, how to set up your EQ to counteract any slight variations in frequency response that your particular set of earphones may have. Now, I should mention at this point that these are designed to be a flat response headphone, and indeed the measurements bear out that they're doing a very, very good job of keeping things very flat. There's a lot of effort and time has gone into the tuning of these using various methods, such as a very thin piece of acoustic mesh on the inside of the pad, so between the driver itself and the foam ear pad. So if I pick these up, it make more sense. So you've got the foam pad here. In between the foam pad and the front of the driver on the cup is a thin piece of acoustic mesh. So that's part of the tuning process. And then if you look in the back of the headphone, you can't see anything because there's a big thick piece of foam doing the damping on the inside. Now, I haven't pulled these apart because they're on loan, but I believe on the inside there's a couple of different shaped pieces of foam to help with damping of certain frequencies. When you buy the spare parts from the Ollo website, you can actually see there the pieces of tuning foam that are required to replace what's fitted from the factory. There might be a bit of breaking continuity here and the scene might look a little bit different now, including a still wet patch on my shirt here. Our little one decided to wake up midway through his nap today and therefore interrupted my filming as well. So I apologise for any changes in vision and also my little wet spot on my t-shirt here, but I'll try and pick up from where I left off and continue this review. So back to it. We've talked so far about the design, the features of the S4X here, and specifically the fact that they are designed for the mastering audience, so music producers, studio engineers, the like. With that in mind, Ollo have designed this to be a very flat measuring headphone, and therefore what you hear when you listen to it is a headphone that reveals exactly what is coming through from the recording, your DAC, and your amplifier. That doesn't mean it's the most resolving headphone I've ever heard, but it definitely translates to a very neutral sound signature. But that doesn't necessarily sound as you might think it does, and I'll explain that now. If you're coming from a headphone that's been considered neutral, analytical, transparent, whatever term you put to it, those headphones on the market that people think of as analytical tools, and a flagship option there being the HD800S or HD800, when you then go to the S4X, what you're going to hear is something that sounds a little bit warm. Only a little bit, but definitely a little bit warm. That's not because of some kind of bass boost, because if you look at this measurement I'm going to share on screen now, what you'll notice is that it's actually very flat through the bass and the mids. The treble on my little measurement rig, which is just a mini DSP ears, that's not a high-end measurement tool, but it does give me a bit of a sense, except for the treble tends to be overly emphasized in terms of peakiness. I don't know if that's the microphone, the silicon fake ears, I'm not sure what's causing that, but I do notice that a lot of headphones have particularly peaky treble, and I believe that comes down to the test rig. Looking at the measurements provided by Ollo, which I tend to trust a whole lot more, they certainly appear to be a much more linear headphone all the way through into the treble. But coming back to what that means for listening, what that means is that you're actually hearing everything in a good sense of balance. And a good sense of balance means you'll actually hear the mid-range warmth and the bass warmth alongside the treble. So it's not tilted warm or bassy, but it has all the information there, and because we're often not used to hearing that from a neutral headphone, the result is our perception of it is that it is slightly warm. Another thing that's worth noting about the sound quality from the S4X is that it is quite a small soundstage that it produces. There's good separation between sounds, you can pick everything out pretty well in the mix, but it doesn't produce a lot of space. You might remember earlier I talked about the fact that the back of the headphone you can't see into and it's quite closed off by foam. That, I think, is what's going on here. So you're getting very little leakage from the back of that headphone, and therefore it doesn't give you the sense of space that a fully open design does. I haven't necessarily felt at any stages like it was a major drawback, but in comparison to truly open headphones, I do miss a little bit of the sense of space, and it would be nice to have a little bit more space in between individual instruments, let alone the overall soundstage size. But that's really my only complaint. In every other way, I find the S4X thoroughly enjoyable. It's very easy to listen to because nothing's emphasized. It works with all different genres because nothing's emphasized. It works with all amplifiers, DACs, and every other part of the source chain because nothing's emphasized. So as you're probably gathering by now, the S4X is very much just going to be faithful to what's coming through from the recording, from the actual source devices you're using, whatever it might be. They're exceptionally good at giving you insight into exactly what's going on in the mix from a tonal perspective. They're not a particularly good tool in terms of giving you a sense of the spatial information. They're okay, but they're not great. But most engineers that I've ever talked to, or when I've been reading and seeing videos from engineers, they would mostly all say that unless you absolutely have to mix on headphones, you should never do your mix on headphones from a spatial point of view, because you're not going to understand the reverb, the placement of the instruments, all the bits and pieces that go into making up that overall sonic image. So think of these as kind of a tonal microscope, something that can let you look into the mix and go, is there too much bass, is there too much treble, is the guitar too emphasized compared to the vocals or the drums? It's all that sort of information is what the S4X really excels at. But what if you're listening to it purely from a musical enjoyment point of view? From that perspective, I thoroughly enjoy listening to the S4X, but at the same time, it's not a headphone I would reach to automatically over some other options, such as say the HiFiMan Sundara. And so that was one of the comparisons I did. I tried both the Ollo S4X and the HiFiMan Sundara, and what I found was that whilst both of them measure quite linearly, you can hear the difference very clearly between the two. Perhaps because one of them's a planar in the Sundara versus the dynamic driver in the S4X, but also there are some slight differences in the signature. At first glance, the Sundara came across as maybe being a little bit clearer in terms of having more space and separation from individual sounds. But I think what's really going on is the Sundara has a slightly thick tonality, and it's therefore slightly smoothed off with everything. It's done in a way that I find very enjoyable, but when comparing the two, as I got used to the two headphones and listened further, I found the S4X was giving me more detail in terms of what I could hear in the mix, the individual placement of instruments, and the textural information that came with it. The Sundaras produce a wider soundstage, but not necessarily a deeper soundstage. However, that extra width means that they do sound, as I've already alluded to, a bit more spacious, and by comparison, the S4X does sound a touch congested in terms of the space between instruments. Individual sounds don't get muddied together, but the distance between them is hard to pick sometimes. I think ultimately for me, I'd say the S4X sounds technically superior, but the Sundara could be, and often will be, the more enjoyable listen. They're both great, but the Sundara brings a very slight sense of colour to the sound that I personally find really enjoyable. If I wanted more transparency, I would reach for the S4X. If I like that bit of colour, I'd reach for the Sundara. The other comparison I tried with the S4X was the Phonon SMB-02, in case you haven't watched that review. The SMB-02 is a little tiny bit cheaper, about $100 Australian cheaper, and to me it is the inferior product. It's got a smooth, slightly warm sound, and it does produce a little bit more space than the S4X, but in all other ways I find the S4X a better headphone, and in the time that I've had both of them here, I've reached for the S4X almost every single time. It's been a great tool for me for general casual listening, whether it's watching YouTube videos, editing these videos after I record them, all those sorts of activities. The S4X has been my go-to while it's been here. And in fact, I'm seriously considering talking to the local supplier about buying this pair of S4X because it is a headphone I'd love to keep in my collection. Not because it necessarily sounds better than anything else in my collection, but because it just sounds so true and neutral across all different frequencies. It's the headphone I would choose to use for mixing all of my videos and adjusting things like EQ and compression to make sure I'm getting the sound that I want that other people are then going to hear. Almost every other headphone I own has some sense of coloration that's going to adjust the final results. And what it's meant is I've had to jump between one headphone to the next to make sure that if I'm mixing with, say, the Empyreans, I then need to go and put on something like the HD800 to make sure I haven't overcompensated and pulled back too much of the bass to then leave it sounding thin and tinny on something like the HD800S. With the Ollo S4X, I can trust what I'm hearing and adjust the levels just right. So with all that in mind, the S4X for me is a headphone that I would thoroughly recommend to anybody looking for a truly neutral headphone. As I've already suggested, a lot of the truly neutral headphones out there are actually on the lean side. They don't have enough bass or mids to actually give you a proper representation of what's coming through the source chain. The S4X, on the other hand, does that perfectly. It does give up a bit in soundstage and space between instruments, but I didn't feel it ever got congested, and I found it enjoyable to listen to for absolutely everything I tried. These are a headphone I'm really comfortable recommending, and I think they're something that a lot of audiophiles out there will find very interesting. At their price, I would probably consider these next to and potentially even above things like the HD6XX or the HD650, of course, and similar headphones in that range. They're a bit different, they're a bit interesting, they're user serviceable with all replaceable parts, and they're also quite environmentally sound. They're not full of a whole lot of plastics, the packaging is environmentally friendly, all little touches that Ollo have done to make these really stand out in my book. So I'd highly recommend these. I'll put links down below where you can get more information and purchase these if you're interested, and they come with my strongest recommendation for a great value, well built and really interesting headphone to listen to, because they're one of the few that delivers exactly what's in the recording. As always, if you found this review useful, please consider subscribing and hitting the like button. I've got some great content coming, so it's worth subscribing to see what's in the pipeline. I've got reviews booked up all the way now until March, maybe even April, so there's lots of great content coming down the tube. For now though, I'll leave you to it. Happy listening, and I'll look forward to seeing you here next time on Passion for Sound.